when I start to, get more curious about even my beliefs, like when my beliefs start to surface up and I start looking at them and I go, yeah, I do the old Byron Katie thing. It's like, okay, is this really true? Is this really true? I find that uh, 99.9% of the time it's not.
Every single action that you hold yourself back from, there's fear behind every doubt, there's fear behind every disempowering belief, there's fear. And the only way to step out of that is to have the courage to see it for what it is. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to An Honest Look.
Yes, good evening to you, depending on when you're
That's
watching
right.
or listening to this. Yeah. Good to see you again, Fati.
Good to see you too. It's been a hot minute.
It's yeah. Yeah, we always have this conversation prior to coming on. And of course we go, why aren't we recording this? And I say, well, I don't know. It's like so we hit the record button and we'll see if anything actually comes up from the last 10-minute conversation we just had. But I want to catch up a little bit for our audience. So are you all settled in now? Is your world still disrupted?
Somewhat, the world is still disrupted for sure, but I'm adjusting. There's some more things to adjust, but I'm getting there. I literally have to accept the fact that I need to replace some furniture pieces in
Oh,
order for this to work. It's just part of it, right? When you move, there are some things that will work and some things that won't. So that's where I'm at. But I'm adjusted. I'm like getting back into my new life.
mm, New,
Back
new
to the
norms.
things into from the standpoint of a new life.
It's I don't know if you watch movies a lot. I just finished watching a really weird and quirky movie called Poor Things. Have you heard about it?
No. Poor things.
Poor Things. Poor Things. Yeah. Emma Stone, who's the key actress, just won an Academy Award for her performance in it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, and so that kind of intrigued me. I watched the Academy Awards, and I'm a big movie buff. I love movies. I love being drawn into the movies. I love movies with good characters in them, like crazy characters. And there was a quote. I got to pull this quote up because the movie in general is about it's a Lady Frankenstein type of picture. So the mad scientist, played by William Dafoe, which is another huge character actor, creates this woman who happens, and I'm not spoiling anything because this all happens within the beginning of the movie. She's pregnant, but she commits suicide. And so he finds the body and he's interested in brain transplants. So the lady was potentially gone, but the baby was still alive. And so he had this crazy, like I said, this movie is beyond anything of any realm, but he transplants the baby brain into the adult body.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And so Emma Stone now has this adult body with a baby brain and sort of has to go through the growing cycle of learning how to walk, learning how to talk, all these different things while she's in an adult body. What I find interesting in the movie is how she maintains this childlike curiosity as she actually becomes an adult, like in her mind. And I can turn anything into a philosophical kind of thing, But there was one quote that really struck me, and this is it. So her character's name is Bella, and she refers to her father as God. Okay, because he actually created her in that sense, right? So metaphorically for her, and she talks about that also throughout the movie too. But so here's the line that really, and I think kind of encapsulates a little bit of what we're talking about when we're referring to disrupting norms, disrupting our thinking, disrupting any, like getting out of rut. So here's the line. As God, my Father, says, it is only that way until we discover the new way it is. And then that is the way it is until we discover the new way it is. And so it goes until the world is no longer flat, electricity lights the night, and shoes are no longer tied with ribbons. And when you think about that from our coaching world through our mental health world, like I remember studying the DSM, like the history behind the DSM, and back in the 50s, they had homosexuality as a disorder, and it was very normal at that time to consider it as that, right? And that's the way it was
It's
until
so
it wasn't
right. It's
that
so
way,
interesting you're mentioning that because I was just reading, I was mentioning this to you before we came on, Stealing Fire by Stephen Kotler. And he talks
right?
about how actually, in regards to homosexuality, they did quite a bit of research and attempts to cure people from
Yes,
homosexuality. I forget if it was like in the third, I think it was in the 40s or 50s. And then it just miserably failed, obviously, because it's not
yeah.
something that you can cure. But they try to use LSD to cure people from homosexuality. Isn't that, I mean, that's not a long time ago.
No, no, it isn't.
It changed, right?
And what's in, thank goodness our mindsets were disrupted enough that we had a hard look at, are we doing the right thing? Are we actually doing more harm than good? And is there something real about, we're talking homosexuality, but anything, right? Because that conversation could have gone so much different. It could have
Right,
gone in a darker place
right,
where they say, well, I guess it's a terminal illness, and therefore,
right,
right? And thank goodness there was enough sense in the medical community to really look at. And I think this is part of disrupting, is holding on to your beliefs lightly,
right,
like your current beliefs. Because yes, at one time we thought the world was flat and we acted as if the world was flat. Okay, nobody ventures out there, right? Like you can only go so far and then you have to come back, right? We have to do the same with our.
because we hold ourselves many versions of the world is flat,
Yeah,
and we're completely unaware of it, right? That's a lot of the empowering beliefs that we have truly are, right? We believe something about ourselves that is the equivalent of the world is flat. And it's not
absolutely.
until we dare to disrupt, we dare to question that we may find out a different truth, right? It's only until we give ourselves the possibility to believe something slightly different, widely different, that we discover that that different belief can actually be true. And actually, when you do believe it, it becomes true,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So, I
yeah,
mean, it's slightly different than whether or not the earth is physically flat. But, just to draw a parallel here of just how wrong and how off the mark some of these beliefs that we have about ourselves are, right? And it's only when we're on the other side of that disruption that we can look back and see, oh, wow, yeah, I was so wrong about myself, right? I cannot believe that I believed those things about myself for so long. And when you really see it, you also see how that belief dictated all your actions along the way, right? You
yep,
really created your reality because the belief is the compass, right?
yeah, yeah. And just like any other, like we can see it readily outside of us. Like I
Right,
think, when I started being a paramedic, and the training that we did around CPR is not the same training of CPR that we're doing today, because new information, new understanding of how, the circulatory system works, and and through other studies, we found that, okay, this is more optimal, right? Now, if we had stuck our guns to the old way of doing it, it would we would be doing more harm than good. We're not doing that well enough in the psychology and the mental health world, because I'm finding more and more, and that even the president of the association is basically saying we need to be doing better.
Right. I mean, I think, we've been talking a lot more about psychedelics recently. I think psychedelics have a really big role in how all of that is being questioned, just because of the remarkable results that you get from disrupting the way we've been doing things and trying
Yeah.
something different,
Yeah.
and actually allowing ourselves to step out of the methodology, right? Step out of all the rules and that psychiatry has to go by, right?
Yeah.
Those rules are like we always talk about, when you go too far on one end, then it does not serve you anymore, right? It becomes damaging. And I think, in regards to psychology, and I'm speculating, but I think it's a pretty good guess. It took many, 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 many years for people to accept therapy and psychology as something that they could even share openly, right? Because there was this notion of, if I see a therapist, there's something wrong with me. If I see a therapist, I must be crazy, right? It took many, many years to normalize that. And it still is not ingrained in the system, like things like, you know, going to a primary care physician, going to the gynecologist, right? Like, just in the US, insurance companies won't cover your mental health needs in regards to going to therapy the same way that they do if you break a leg or an
Hmm.
arm, right? So it still is not on the same level. Like a therapist, if you go and look at what insurance companies cover for a therapist, it's like insulting. It really is. And then I go see my primary care physician. And this is not to say that the primary care physician doesn't deserve to be paid the way they do, but there's such a discrepancy between the two, and on some level, having my checkup every year, it's important. But if my mental health is deteriorating that entire year, that's a greater problem.
Well, something just come to mind. Like I love the analogy between our physical being, right?
Right.
So we notice that there's something wrong with our, you got a back pain or whatever, right? We never think twice about going to the doctor. We also never think, oh my God, I'm broken.
Right.
Like we just say, okay, there's something going on here, right? I know the body has a natural way of healing, right? But sometimes it needs, right? A bone will heal on its own, but it's nice to have a doctor to have it straightened out and put a cast on it, and then
Right.
the body will take over. Well, what if our brains are exactly the same way? Like we don't treat our mind as an organ that has the potential to heal itself, right? And the stigma around it, like if we want to remove the stigma of going to therapy or going to coaches or getting psychological help, I think we have to get this idea that you're not broken when you go see these people.
Right. I mean, I do think, again, all of this comes from this conditioning, and
Absolutely.
social conditioning takes a long time you know, to shift, right? Because it has to be like a mass shift in thinking, right? It has to be a shift in
Well,
thinking that
there's a turning point, right?
there's a
Yeah.
turning point. And I think that over the years, psychology has had to adapt to all the rules and the guidelines and all of this in order to get through the system, right?
Yes.
Then that need to comply with certain requirements has started to dictate what psychology can do, right? Like it has become very rigid in some sense. And that's a limitation, right? That's a limitation of what we're seeing today that's being disrupted in some sense by the psychedelic research, right? Where it becomes this contrast shows very clearly some of the limitations of that system, right?
Well, not only that, like I'm also there's a book I just finished reading called The Secret to Mental Health. Sorry, George
Mm.
Pransky, a doctor, psychologist, been practicing for 40 years, over 40 years. He cites research, and studies that are showing the burnout rate of psychologists and psychiatrists. That because they're dealing with a so-called, what they're classifying as an illness, and not finding help in a not an immediate way, but in a timely way, because I know you have experience yourself over years, right? That it's taking a toll on their mental health.
Of course.
Yeah.
I can relate to that as a coach. I've had moments where of, not, I wouldn't say frustration, but like of feeling a little not as, and not as hopeful is also not the right word, but like a little bit of frustration in this back and forth that happens when people get stuck, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That's really the nature of the mind, right? You do all this work and you get to a point and then you start noticing the self-sabotage coming back in.
Mm.
That very much has to do with the how long the process can be, right? Even in coaching, and coaching is a much faster process than therapy can be, right? But it can get lengthy if there's a lot of resistance, right? If there's a lot of negative chatter, if there's a lot to, like work on in regards to really the mindset of the person, and the habitual thinking and the level of trauma they've been through and how deeply ingrained that is, right? It can take some time to eradicate that. And along the way, I don't think it's so much the willpower that kind of dissolves, it just becomes exhausting because it really requires you to consistently do the work and stay on the path for quite some time, right? So along the way, there's that exhaustion that can kick in, and people can start falling off, and that's okay, right? Breaks are really healthy in that case, but then you do start back up a little bit further behind than where you were when you stopped, right? Because that's just the way the brain is, right? We're not broken. The brain is a machine that works in a very specific way. So when we get out of our own way, in the way we are conditioned to think about ourselves and relating to our brains, and see that just as a machine that works this way, and in order for it to be optimized, these are the steps that you need to take, and these are the steps that you need to take to allow it to recharge and function better, right? And we get out of the conditioning of something is wrong with me, I am broken, what is happening, when we get out of that and just really sit with the acceptance of what is, we're not our brains. The brain is a machine and it works this way, this way, and this way, then the work happens a little bit faster, right?
100%. 100%. Yes. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just it's just what
Or we
brings it
understand.
back
Yeah.
is the chatter that kicks in, right? Is the need to have it happen faster. I'm not there yet, right? And all behind all of those thoughts, right? Behind that rehearsal, every single one of those things that you tell yourself has a belief attached to it.
Oh, well, everything,
Every
everything.
single thing, right?
Well, this is it. Like on a global scale, this universe is run on belief systems.
Yeah, the whole entire thing, right?
The whole time thing, right? So like one person believes this and one person believes this, and we create a culture and a
And guess
democracy.
what?
Hmm?
It's all made up.
It's
It's
all
all
made
made
up.
up. We made up every single belief. There is no universal law that says that you have to get there faster. There's no
No,
universal law that says you're not where you should be. There's no universal law that says there's something broken with you. It's all things that we have made up and bought into that
yeah,
were either chosen by you unconsciously or drilled into you from birth, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
We're blank slate when we're born. Well, there's when we're
There's,
conceived,
well,
when we're conceived, right? And then the conditioning starts, right? Which is a necessary tool for us to be able to function in this world, right? We have to have beliefs. We have to put in information
so
in
there's
the
an interesting. That's an interesting notion because that in itself is a belief that we have to have beliefs.
I mean, you
Come on,
you
I'm just
gotta
saying.
believe that you can walk to walk, right? You gotta get this information in, right? How do I talk? How do I walk? How do I, like basic functions that we have, right? They all start getting wired in as soon as we're born, right? Just from the first breath that we take, right? But it also is what we believe, on a mental level as the brain develops. You're just like a sponge taking in everything in your environment, right?
And this is what I liked about that movie. Like if you watch the movie for like it's a very sort of graphic movie. and it's rated 18 plus for a reason, I believe. But if you can sort of get past the imagery, the whole notion, because what I loved about the character is that she's very logical, and
Mm.
she's in a world that isn't logical, like it's very emotionally driven, and she's questioning it, right? So she holds all beliefs really lightly. Like, I'm talking about how to get along with the world, right? She's up against, some people are saying, well, you just got to ignore all these poor people, kind of a thing, and she's questioning those things, like, and she's questioning societal norms, like, like she gets in trouble over doing certain actions, and she's being told, you have to be civilized, you have to, right, you have to conform, you don't do this at the dinner table, you don't, kind of a thing, right? But she's very spontaneous, and I fight the idea of, I wonder, right? And I'm talking about, not like, I think there's things that are innate of us, like, like, I don't believe I had to believe that I could walk to walk. I just started to walk. Okay, there was a realization of, oh geez, I can walk, right?
I mean, children will fall, right?
Well,
And
absolutely.
because there's that innate belief that they can do it, they get up and do it again, right? But there's not as much conditioning happening there
Well,
where they beat
yeah,
themselves up. Oh my God,
no,
I failed, right?
and this is where I think Einstein talked about, he says, if we taught children how to walk the way we teach them in our educational system, a lot of people wouldn't be walking today.
Right.
It's that kind of a thing, right? But I mean, aside from that part of it, when I start to, get more curious about even my beliefs, like when my beliefs start to surface up and I start looking at them and I go, yeah, I do the old Byron Katie thing. It's like, okay, is this really true? Is this really true? I find that 99.9% of the time it's not. Now, I still have free will. I can still carry on and hold that belief as if it's a dear child of mine, and I have to protect it. And some people will go to death protecting a belief, right? But
It oftentimes has nothing to do with the belief. It
no,
has to
no.
do with the fear of letting go of that belief and
Well,
what
the
that
fear
means.
of not knowing what life would be like without that belief.
The uncertainty is and I think that's why, we're talking about disruption. That's why disrupting is not for everyone, right? Because disruption really, really implies a level of discomfort and a level of comfort with not knowing, you know, discomfort of
Yeah.
like being the one speaking up and disrupting, right? And like getting yourself out of what you think you know, right? And comfort with being okay with not knowing for the time being, right? Comfort with allowing something new to come in, comfort
Well,
with accepting different viewpoints.
I want to address that part because I think it's important, like, because when I think of disruption, right, it's like erupt, like like a volcano eruption, right? And a lot of people have that image, right? It's sort of like a disruption is something catastrophic. Why not take on the idea of titrating disruption? In other words, doing it in small bits and pieces.
Right.
Look at, we're not talking about the big ones where it looks like I'm going to quit my job and divorce my spouse, and I'm going to move to another part of the country or whatever. Like, no, we're not saying that. Like, that might happen, who knows, but there are so many micro changes that could happen, and it's the small moves that move the ship, right?
I mean, it's just taking the example that a lot of people can relate to, breaking up a marriage, right? That's a big disruption. That's a big step to take. Why don't you start questioning some of the things within the marriage, right? Why do I go to this thing every Sunday night and I hate it, right? Why don't you start disrupting there? But if I didn't go there every Sunday night and I chose to do something that I actually enjoy for once, right? That's a going back to what you're suggesting, right? Small bits at a time.
Yeah.
That can be a good way to do it, right? You don't have to boldly go in and like make a big splash like you're
Well,
saying.
and this
More
is something.
comfortable with it, right?
Yeah, there's a thing called the crazy eight, a diagram, and it's this infinite loop of going through frustration, depression, and all this. Like we go back and forth between these two mood swings, kind of. They're not mood swings, but emotions. And at one point, we sort of get to the point where enough's enough, and we make a huge disruption in our life based on enough's enough.
Right.
A lot of times that's not healthy. And that's why I say, like when you're settled and when you've settled your snow globe, you can start to look at your beliefs more from a observational point of view, and just says, okay, is it really true? Like, am I going to catch on fire if I actually took on this public speaking thing, or if I spoke up? Like what would happen? And do it in baby steps, and then you find out it's like, oh, it's like walking, right? It's like when we first learned to walk, going back to the baby example, right? We fell down. Well, this is what happens, right? We chest it, we fall
Right.
down and say, okay, well, I guess that didn't work. Well, maybe I'll hang on to the table this time and see what happens.
Right.
Oh my God, I can walk. And this is what happens with our beliefs.
It does two amazing things, right? You get to try something different and expand your viewpoint, right?
Hmm.
See that there are other options, but also it's an opportunity to look at on the other side of it. Why was I resisting it so much? What did it really mean about me?
Totally. See that.
Fighting it too
I
much.
I realized that the other day. It's not the belief that worries me so much. It's the meaning of the belief that I
What
have.
does it mean about me? Yeah. What is that? What is how? Yeah. What are others going to think about me?
Oh, oh, yes, yes. All those things. Well, like
We're,
even
we're not holding on to the belief. We're holding on to the meaning that it has for us.
well,
And
and the illusion of what we think will happen.
and what we think that others will think about us, which is another
Absolutely.
thing
Absolutely.
too, because
Right.
those are all projections. We're just
Yeah.
projecting. I I am responding to what I think that you think about me.
I know. It's we did a show about that. It is so funny. It's like I have a perception about what you're thinking about,
What
and
I'm,
it's yeah,
it's
and it's
it's not what you actually think about me. It's what I'm projecting onto you. So
yeah,
what I think that you think about me. So I'm responding to to complete projection. And we
totally.
really believe it. Oh, that's totally what he's thinking. It's like, well, you can't really say that with certainty until you actually ask the person what they think.
Well, yeah, and then you find out you've been chasing your own tail. But when you realize that you're chasing your own tail, it's like, wait a minute. It's like I have so I love running experiments. I call them experiments, and they're part of, disrupting.
Right.
And a lot of times I would hold back on and they're my opinions about, we have a service up here in Canada. I think in the United States and I need to do more research on it, but we have medical assisted induced death. Okay. And there's certain criteria and things like that. Well, I'm finding a lot of loopholes, or people are using this service outside of what it was originally intended for.
To do, yeah.
Yeah. And so it wants to stretch out into the mental health world, which once you, this is the terrible part. Like, okay, so how hard would it be to go back to thinking that the world is flat?
We just have to insert all those beliefs little by little by
We,
little.
we would we would have to, right.
Yeah.
This is what I find with anything. Like, like once we've hit a tipping point, it's so hard to go back, right? Regardless of all the evidence, regardless of whatever, the reluctancy, not to say we can't, but it's just so hard. And so I've been really vocal about the MAID, including mental health, because it's basically saying that mental health is a terminal illness. Like there are incurable mental illness, And this is where the label is coming from, because many psychiatrists, because there's like 450 different modalities for depression, right? That like if you get one doctor that's kind of on one or three different modalities and nothing's working, he's basically going to say, you know what? And I've had clients come to me, and colleagues have said, well, I'm done. Like, what do you mean you're done? Well, the doctor says I have to live with my post-traumatic stress. Oh, right.
Really?
It's like, and I have clients, I have friends, I have colleagues that have had complex post-traumatic stress for years and have basically are deemed cured now. But at that time, the doctor said, no, no, you're going to be stuck with this for the rest of your life, and gave them that sentence. So that's a belief that I'm telling people, hold that lightly, because the evidence that's coming out is that that's not true anymore. And
That's
if you
not
can,
hasn't been true. We've had the research since the 50s,
yeah,
since
yeah,
the late 30s, actually, not the 50s.
yeah, no,
The,
no,
right, PTSD was being treated with LSD back, over 50
oh,
years ago,
yeah,
right? MDMA assisted therapy. I mean, now it's made it out into the mainstream, right? But that research has been going on for quite some time. We've known that you're not destined to live with PTSD. There are ways to treat that, but because it's not in the mainstream, it's not in our global belief system,
well, and
right?
this is where disruption has to happen.
Yeah,
Like, and unfortunately, it sometimes takes a very bold step. Sometimes it takes a very bold act. Like, and I'm not, and the
sacrifice.
problem, yeah,
Yeah,
and
sacrifice.
problem with disruptors is that, if you're going up against the mainstream, there's a lot of people that are pushing back, right? And
It's
sometimes you feel very much alone.
selfless act, and it's
Yeah,
one that may not be rewarded for a long time. I mean, there are
and
psychiatrists that back in the
yeah,
50s have lost their jobs, right?
yes,
And
yeah,
then being like recognized now that
yeah,
this is coming back out, and their work and their role in that disruption and how important it was and how pivotal it was is being recognized now, many, many, many years later.
yeah.
So yeah, disruption is not an easy thing to take out publicly and run with sometimes, depending on what you're disrupting. It is a selfless act, and it has an impact, right?
Yeah.
Are we just ready to accept that beyond what our ego wants, which is the immediate reward, the immediate recognition, and just do what genuinely deep inside feels the right thing to do and say, right? Well, this doesn't fit. This does not make sense. Here is why. And
Yeah.
I'm willing to stand by that regardless of the repercussions, which can be, significant, can be
Well, yeah.
significant.
So I know we can't get it. So promise me that this. I think in the very near future, let's get back together again. I know we will, anyways. But
That's re-
let's let's continue this conversation a bit about, because part of being a disruptor, or wanting to be a disruptor, is again what's held in the belief of holding you back from, right. And we can explore that more,
I mean,
if you want to.
fair. It's fair. I mean, I forgot who I was talking to. I think the world is this back and forth between two things, right? Fear and the courage to overcome it.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah,
that's it, right? Behind every single action that you hold yourself back from, there's fear. Behind every doubt, there's fear. Behind every disempowering belief, there's fear. And the only way to step out of that is to have the courage to see it for what it is, to disrupt it, to
yeah.
change it, right? We're going from fear to courage. And that's the only way out of things that we don't like, that are not serving us, is that willingness to have the courage to step on the other side, to
Which
see
don't
something
mind.
different, to believe something different, to do something different, to be someone different,
Yeah,
be seen as someone different.
yeah, yeah. No, and that's pretty exciting territory. Oh, I feel like there's so much more.
Well,
Um,
we're gonna have to. full episode to this.
Yeah.
I strongly believe in
Yeah. There's more to come for sure.
this is what's going to change the world is that courage to disrupt.
Yeah. So I'm curious what our audience has to say about disruption. I'm curious about what they have to say about anything. So I encourage please make a comment. Reach out to us if you want to talk more about fear, disrupting your belief systems, any of those kind of things. We're open to have conversations jointly or individually because that's what we do. That's just what we do.
Well, we can talk about how do I gain that courage to disrupt? How do I get past that? And that's a really big question, right? Because
And you don't have to do it alone. That's the thing, right? That's what we're here for, right? It's a partnership. It's a team. And yeah, I, I, I support anybody that is willing to step out because it feels like you're alone. It does. It feels like, am I the only one that thinks this way?
no,
No.
we're all we are projecting onto the world, our
Yeah.
inner world, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, there's many of us doing that, sitting in solitude, thinking that we're alone, and we're all thinking the same things, probably, right?
Yeah.
So it was a pleasure to talk to you today, as usual. Just if you found value in our conversation, help us amplify our impact, share the episode, subscribe, help us just reach more people. The more people we reach, the more people we can help. And
Yeah.
that's really why we have these conversations.
Yeah. Thank
All
you.
right, everyone. Until next time.